Almost every motor act can be considered a perceptual motor skill. For example, a softball infielder sees the location of the pitch, the batter striking the ball, and the ball bouncing on the ground, hears the hit and perhaps sees a runner on the base path, and feels the position of her body arms. Sensory information and perceptual information are highly integrated. We are uncomfortable if the information from one sense contradicts the information from another. We do not simply receive information from the environment, rather we act to obtain information. For example, we turn our ears toward a sound or reach to feel the texture of a surface. Sensory receptors can attach different meanings to the same stimulus, and even the same individual can interpret a single stimulus in different ways. For individuals to move or act in an environment, they must perceive that environment. The environment influences what movements are possible, and moving through the environment informs us about the nature of the environment. The sensory perceptual systems are, of course, individual structural constraints to movement and to other activities such as reading. Several aspects of vision determine how clearly one can see objects. The newborn's resolution of detail is such that she can differentiate facial features from a distance of 20 inches. At about 6 months of age, as infants begin to self-propel locomotion, their visual systems perceive adequate detail to assist them in the tasks. Visual sensation continues to improve during childhood. As a person ages, changes in the visual system occur naturally, and some conditions and diseases become more prevalent. These changes may have implications for the performance of skills as well as tasks of everyday living. For example, the condition termed presbyopia becomes clinically significant at around age 40. It affects the ability to see nearby images clearly. Visual disturbances that are more prevalent in older adults include cataracts, glaucoma, and age-related maculopathy. Signs that may indicate a visual problem include squinting, under or overreaching for objects, and performing unusual head movements to align one's gaze with a particular object. One of the fundamental perceptions is that of three-dimensional space. Visual sensations are received by the sensory receptors in the retina in approximately a two-dimensional format. So how do people interpret the world in 3 dimensions? To perceive space in 3 dimensions, individuals must perceive depth and distance. One source is retinal disparity. Each eye sees the visual field from a slightly different angle. Depth perception is aided by good visual acuity. By moving the head or moving through space, an individual receives depth cues for motion parallax. Objects in space change locations on our retinas, and nearer objects overlap more distant objects. James J. Gibson suggested that this optic flow provides much information about the three-dimensional nature of our environment. Viewers use an assumption of physical equality to judge depth. When two like objects have the same size but project different relative sizes on the retina, we assume that the object with the larger retinal size is closer to us. In the well-known visual cliff experiments of Walk and Gibson, infants between 6 and 14 months of age placed on one side of an apparent drop-off stopped at the edge even though the mothers beckoned them from the other side. Behavioral experiments on depth perception are consistent with work on maturation of the visual cortex. More older adults than younger adults fail depth perception tests. Higher failure rates probably reflect an increase with advancing age and the number of viewers with visual problems. It is equally important to perceive objects, their attributes, and their relationships to oneself and to others. Among the important attributes of objects are size, shape, and motion. With growth, what infants initially perceive as a surface might become an object. For example, the floor of a playpen is a surface to an infant, whereas the playpen is an object to an adult. The perception of edges and boundaries helps us extract an object or figure from the background environment. The type of perception that allows us to find the embedded objects is figure and ground perception. The perception of edges and boundaries also helps us distinguish whole objects from parts of an object, called whole and part perception. We know little of infant perception of edges and boundaries. Some research indicates that infants rely more on depth and motion cues than on edges. Very young children have difficulty integrating objects that form a whole. Pictures of this nature are used to assess whole and part perception. The perception of distances influences our perception of objects. We must perceive that an object has constant size, even though it might vary in distance from us. Evidence of newborn sensitivity to shape or form, or shape constancy, has also been found through the habituation method. If a newborn is habituated to one shape and is then presented a new one, the newborn will spend more time looking at the new shape. To perceive form, viewers must either attend to or ignore the spatial orientation. In some instances, two objects are identical, even if one is tipped to one side, upside down, or rotated. Motion perception is of particular interest in the study of motor development. Early in infancy, infants lack adult sensitivity to motion. Direction of motion is not well perceived until 8 weeks of age. Attention plays a role in the performance of visual perception tasks, and that performance is improved by attention to the important parts of the environment. The kinesthetic or proprioceptive system yields information about the relative position of the body parts in relation to one another, position of the body in space, the body's movements, and the nature of objects that the body comes into contact with. Kinesthetic information comes from various types of receptors throughout the body called proprioceptors. Examples are muscle spindles, Golgi tendon organs, joint receptors, vestibular semicircular canals, and cutaneous receptors. The kinesthetic system provides both feedback about body position and feed-forward information to help us maintain our body position. The first prenatal reflex that can be elicited is opposite side neck flexion through tactile stimulation around the mouth at just 7.5 weeks after conception. At birth, infants clearly respond to touch. They can also identify the location of touches. The labyrinthine writing reflex appears about the second postnatal month, and that fact provides some evidence of vestibular function. Therefore, the system for kinesthetic sensation is functional early in life. Improvements in kinesthetic perception continue through adolescence and into young adulthood. Children improve substantially in kinesthetic sensitivity between 6 and 7 years, and then gradually improve from 7 to 11 years of age. Kinesthetic perception can be grouped in several ways: localization, manipulation and movement, and then body awareness. An individual must know where on the body a touch occurs, as well as the nature of that touch. This knowledge is termed tactile localization. Children are less accurate at 4 years of age than at 6 to 8 years in locating a touch on the hands and forearms. Ayers in 1966 reported that only half of a group of 5-year-olds could consistently discriminate a touch on different fingers. At age 4, the average child can handle objects purposefully, and by age 5, a child can explore the object's major features. Perception of movement is another form of kinesthetic perception. To carry out everyday activities and to perform complex skills, it is necessary to have a sense of the body, its various parts, and its dimensions. Aspects of body awareness include identification of body parts, awareness of self, laterality, lateral dominance, side preference, spatial orientation, and directionality. Children need a sense of the body's spatial dimensions, such as up and down, forward, backward, and left and right. By about age 4, most children can place an object in front or behind something else. Young children develop an objective awareness of self during their second year. Yet, up to age 30 months, they tend to make scale errors such as trying to fit their bodies into spaces that are too small. Although children typically master up and down, front and back awareness before age 3, they develop an understanding that the body has 2 distinct sides, or laterality, at approximately 4 to 5 years of age. An age-related improvement in the ability to make right and left discriminations occurs between 4 and 5 years old. Young children also have difficulty executing a task when a limb must cross the midline of the body. Interest in lateral dominance, especially hand dominance, dates back to Aristotle. Asymmetries in hand use have been widely observed in infants. Infants younger than 3 months of age grasp objects longer, make a fist longer, and are more active with one hand than the other. A link may exist between early asymmetries and later hand dominance because the asymmetries tend to follow orientation. Infants who prefer to turn their heads to the right seem to prefer reaching with their right hand and vice versa. By 7 months, infants show a preference for manipulating with a particular hand, usually the hand that emerges as preferred in early childhood, most often by the age of 4, remains the dominant hand in youth and adulthood. In addition to hand preferences, we come to favor one of our eyes, ears, and feet over the other. In the past, developmentalists have suggested that pure dominance is preferable, the implication being that one side of the brain is clearly dominant. Kinesthetic spatial orientation involves perception of the body's location and orientation in space, independent of vision. Directionality is often linked to laterality and awareness of the body's 2 distinct sides. Children with a poor sense of laterality typically also have poor directionality. Individuals obtain most information for directional judgments through vision. By age 8, children typically are able to say correctly, "The ball is on my right, and the ball is to the right of the bat." We have known for some time that some, but not all, older adults lose cutaneous sensitivity, vibratory sensitivity, and sensitivity to temperature and pain. Proprioceptive impairment in the lower limb is concerning because of its role in loss of balance in older adults. When additional proprioceptive information is added to cutaneous information, older adults could make more accurate judgments. Although it is not as important to skill performance as vision or kinesthetics, auditory information is still valuable for accurate performance. Hearing involves the external ear, the middle ear, and the cochlea of the inner ear. A newborn's hearing is imperfect partly because of the gelatinous tissue filling the inner ear. The absolute threshold of hearing is about 60 decibels higher for a newborn than for an adult. Newborns also do not discriminate changes in the intensity of sounds or differential threshold or in a sound frequency as well as adults can. Infants might be predisposed to listen to speech and process their own mother's voice faster than that of others. By 6 months, however, infants' hearing is similar to that of adults. More older adults than younger adults suffer from presbycusis, but the source of this loss varies among individuals. Some hearing loss might result from the physiological degeneration, but hearing loss often results from exposure to environmental noise. Hair cells killed by excessive noise exposure at any point in the lifespan results in a permanent loss. The absolute threshold for hearing pure tones in speech increases in older adults, meaning that sounds must be louder for older adults to hear them. As a person ages, the ability to hear high-frequency sound is particularly affected. We can determine the location of an event by sound, whether something or someone is leaving or approaching, who or what made a sound, and even the material from which an object is made. Auditory perception gives us much information about the environment in which we move. We locate a sound by determining its direction and distance from us. Newborns turn in the direction of a sound and improve their ability to locate sound during the first year. Infants determine the direction of nearby sounds better than that of distant sounds. Paris and Bollinger found that 7-month-olds reached for an object that was the source of a sound significantly more often when it was within reach than when it was out of reach. It is possible that they choose not to reach because they know it is out of reach. Older adults with presbycusis show a notable decrement in the ability to localize sound. The perception of sound differences by children is often studied by means of discrimination tasks. Children are asked to distinguish two sounds that are similar in pitch, loudness, or speech sound, such as D and T or B and P. Infants as young as 1 to 4 months can discriminate basic sounds such as P, B, and M. A similar trend apparently exists for discrimination of pitch. For speech and music to become more than just noises, individuals must perceive relationships between sounds. 3 properties of sound give rise to auditory patterns: time, intensity, and frequency. Speech and music have a temporal pattern, an intensity or loudness and softness pattern, and a frequency or a high pitch or low pitch pattern simultaneously. At 12 months, infants can perceive changes in the number of groups and in the number of tones in each group. By the end of the first year, infants can perceive sound on the basis of a temporal pattern. Infants progress rapidly in auditory pattern perception during their first year. These advances probably are prerequisites to language development. The environment in which infants develop might tune the developing auditory system to recognize certain features of language and music. In this way, we might learn to prefer the perceptual patterns prevalent in our native language and the music of our culture. Often, a person must attend to certain sounds while ignoring other irrelevant sounds in the background. The figure is the sound of interest, and the ground is distracting noises in the background. Some children have more difficulty than others in separating auditory figures from the background. Older adults commonly report difficulty with hearing amid background noise. This reflects changes in the sensory system or in parts of the neurological system related to hearing. As noted previously, development of auditory perception is rapid. Not long after birth, infants can already perceive the location of and differences in sound. It is clear that some aspects of visual, kinesthetic, and auditory perception exist in infancy. Developmental trends continue through childhood. By the time children are 8 to 12 years old, aspects of their visual perception have developed to near adult levels. By the age of 10, they perform at near adult levels on many auditory discrimination tasks as well. Some aspects of auditory perception have not been studied in children. At any age, limited sensory information can serve as a rate limiter to performance by influencing perception of needed information.